Okay. Good morning. So the weather is still cool, which means I still don't need the fan, which means I will still not be sweating. This is just going to continue where we had left off last night. There's just one section from chapter one that needs to be done, which is the sixth section. So I'll be doing the sixth section. It's a fairly large section, so I think it may take up the entire length of this particular video. Um, okay, so in the sixth section, Monique Wittig is talking about the way in which, mind you, this is something that she's saying, not necessarily something that Judith Butler agrees with, or or indeed that I agree with. This is something that she says. So she says that homosexual desire transcends the categories of sex and gender, well, sex, because sex is implicated in the binarized reification, that is gendering and sexing of bodies. So sex as a category itself is regarded as binarist. And it isn't just regarded as binarist, it is actually regarded as sort of heteronormative. So the assumption of sex is heterosexuality. Again, this is in continuation with what I had talked about in, I think, my second video, not on Judith Butler, but second video posted over here. So she says, therefore, that gendering and sexing of bodies are therefore both leading up to the project of consolidating heterosexuality. So she maintains that language per se is not gendered. It is only used in a gendered way to suppress women, subordinate, and exclude them. And I am then going to talk about the way in which she uses Freud. Now, she uses Freud in a, well, she reads Freud against the grain, and she basically says that I am not going to give in to what Freud talks about when he talks about non-genital sexuality and genital sexuality. So when Freud talks about non-genital sexuality, he basically means it to be infantile. And when Freud talks about genital sexuality, he means it to be an adult sexuality. So then Monique Wittig says, if that is the case, then I am going to opt out of the genital sexuality, and I'll go for non-genital sexuality. And she says that the non-genital sexuality is going to be anti-patriarchal. Well, this is something that Judith Butler is not very comfortable with. And then she goes on to talk about, the Butler goes on to talk about the law of the father, yes? And she says that the law of the father is something that obviously organizes culture, it organizes language, but she says that the law of the father also does something else. The law of the father is a heterosexualization of identity. And what happens to the unconscious? And she says that the unconscious doesn't disappear, unconscious doesn't just sort of go away. The unconscious actually basically re-emerges. It sort of re-emerges in the discourse. And in re-emerging into discourse, that is to say in language, in culture, it sort of frustrates the possibility of coherence. Now remember that patriarchy is constantly trying to sell us a sense of coherence. Oh, this is perfectly logical, you should be born a male, you should become a man, and you should desire a woman. There is a certain coherence that patriarchy is trying to sell to us. But of course it doesn't always work like that, and it doesn't work like that because the creation of that coherence means a lot of suppression, right? So a lot of things about us are suppressed so that a proper heterosexuality can be formed. Now the things that are being suppressed, this is the important point, is that they don't disappear, they don't just go away, they don't fade into thin air. they re-emerge in discourse. And when they re-emerge in discourse, the coherence that patriarchy has been wanting to consolidate, that becomes imperiled, that becomes a little endangered. And I think that is the important thing for us to note. And this is where also Judith Butler says that we must understand that this whole talk about feminists grounding their theory on the female body, she regards as a bit of a problem. She regards that as a bit of a problem because of the very simple reason that she seems to be saying that if they think mere physical erasure of femininity will consolidate their subversion, they are all the more tying down their politics to the body. They talk of non-phallic sexuality being truly subversive, but does conventional performance of sex have to always be imitative, reproductive, and consolidatory? And this, I think, this is where she's warming up to the idea for which she's known very well, which is the genderless performance. She's warming up to that idea. And over here she says that, wait a minute, she says that, and this is something that we are all very familiar with, aren't we? Because when, how often have we had to answer the question that, oh, I understand, I understand that, you're a gay couple, or I understand that you're a lesbian couple, but in your couple, who is the husband and who is the wife? Yes, so therefore and of course, there may be some couples who are going to say that, yes, I'm the husband and he's the wife, or somebody's going to say, yes, she's the husband and I am the wife. And the moment a gay couple talks like that, automatically the other person is going to say, oh, you see, this is it, this is where you're actually imitating heterosexuality. And then she goes on to say that, well, actually, yes, if you say that this is imitation, fine, but then is all imitation necessarily a tribute? Right? So that is the first point. Is all imitation necessarily a tribute? And the second point is that exactly that which is being imitated is an imitation in itself. It is an imitation in itself. So therefore, if we say that, you're imitating heterosexuality, well, heterosexuality itself is performed as an imitation, isn't it? Because all the time, all that you ever see is heterosexuality. So therefore, there is a certain kind of imitation that is also there in the performance of heterosexuality as well. And this is where she says that I think the moment we understand that it is not as though, the presence of heterosexuality in gay relationships or in lesbian relationships is an imitation of heterosexuality. What it actually is that it is also showing up that heterosexuality in itself is an imitation. So she goes on to say that if we think that heterosexuality is an imitation too, then therefore it is revealed that gender is therefore a performance. And I think it is very important that even when she's talking about sexuality, she is still talking about gender. And that is something, it's a point that we have to remember, is that even when she's talking about sexuality, she's still talking about gender, because she believes that even when we think about sexuality, we are still thinking about gender. Think about it. When we think about homosexual relationships, we are thinking about two men. When we think about lesbian relationships, we are thinking about two women. So therefore, even when we think about sexuality, our thought about sexuality is still tied to gender. So she is very clear about it. She says that we have to understand that even when we are talking about sexuality, it is still gender that we are talking about. And if a gay couple says that yes, we are husband and wife, or if a lesbian couple says yes, we are husband and wife, what they're basically doing is that they are denaturalizing and mobilizing gender categories. Right? They are denaturalizing and mobilizing gender categories. How are they doing that? Well, they are doing that in the sense that if in our heads we have been taught to think that a husband has to be somebody with a penis, if a lesbian woman says I am the husband, then clearly that linkage between the term husband and the body of the man is being severed. Similarly, if a gay man says that I am the wife, then again the linkage between the term wife and the body that must have a vagina, that linkage is being cut. And it is this cutting off, it is this severing of the linkage between the term and the body which Judith Butler regards as being extremely productive. She regards it as being very, very liberatory. So then the first chapter, and this is where I'll end, the first chapter ends with the question, which is the moot question of gender trouble anyway, is when can repetition be subversive? When can repetition be subversive? And many of you will be able to tell that immediately because well, you know, this is an example that I always give, is that when students are imitating me on Teachers' Day or on the day of their farewell, what are they doing? Because they're imitating me, so then I can labor under the belief that they're imitating me because they love me. But the way in which they're imitating me also makes me suspicious that they are perhaps making fun of me. But I'm not entirely sure if they're making fun of me. So I'm confused. And it is this confusion which I think the performance of gender can create. Confuse patriarchy. Because patriarchy is interested in fixing down, in pinning down one meaning. But when you're performing certain gendered activities with a body to which it is not accustomed, then what you're doing is you are confusing patriarchy, because patriarchy is not entirely sure whether you are performing that gender to pay tribute to that gender or whether you are performing that gender to make fun of that gender. So it is this confusion which I think is a post-structuralist tool of guerrilla warfare against patriarchy, and this is something that Judith Butler is fairly interested in furthering, in advocating. Okay, well, with this we come to the end of our discussion of the first chapter. We shall go on to the discussion of the second chapter, which is prohibition, psychoanalysis, and the heterosexual matrix, in the next video. Thank you.